The rain in Seattle does not wash things away. That is a common misconception held by tourists and poets. The rain here preserves. It seals the city in a gray, wet lacquer, locking secrets behind condensation on glass and soaking into the timber of old houses until they grow heavy with the weight of water. I have always respected the rain because, as an architect, I know what it can do to a structure that is not sound. It finds the cracks. It exposes the weak joints. It is the ultimate auditor of integrity. My name is David Mitchell, and for 15 years, I have built things. I take abstract concepts, safety, comfort, prestige, and I translate them into steel beams, poured concrete, and tempered glass. My clients come to me when they want something that will last, something that defies the damp erosion of this climate. I have always prided myself on my ability to see the flaw in a blueprint before the first shovel hits the dirt. I can look at a rendering and tell you if the load-bearing wall is insufficient or if the drainage grade will flood the basement in a decade. I see the world in terms of forces and resistance. But I missed the rod in my own living room. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that feels identical to 1,000 other Tuesday evenings in a comfortable upper-middle-class existence. The house was quiet. My wife, Elena, was upstairs. I could hear the faint, rhythmic thrum of the shower running. She spent a long time in the water these days. She told me it was for her skin, for relaxation, to wash off the stress of her charity galas and social obligations. I believed her because the alternative was a variable I had not calculated. I was in my study, a room lined with dark walnut shelves and the smell of old paper and fresh drafting ink. My desk was a sprawling surface of plans for the new municipal library downtown, a project that had consumed my focus for months. I needed a specific reference photo from our vacation to Italy 3 years ago, a detail of a cornice we had seen in Florence. I picked up the family iPad, the one we kept on the coffee table for controlling the smart home system and browsing recipes. It was a sleek device, innocent in its design. I unlocked it. The screen glowed with a picture of us from that same trip. We looked happy. I looked at the man in the photo, younger, less gray at the temples, smiling with a naivety that now seems embarrassing. Elena looked radiant, her arm draped possessively over my shoulder. I tapped the photo icon. The device stuttered. A spinning wheel appeared in the center of the screen, followed by a system notification. iCloud storage full. Synchronization paused. I frowned. We paid for the highest tier of storage. How could it be full? I clicked on the settings to investigate the breakdown. Photos and videos took up 90% of the space. That seemed odd. I navigated back to the gallery to see if Elena had inadvertently recorded hours of video in her pocket or something equally trivial. The gallery refreshed. Because of the sync error, the device was pulling down everything from the cloud to verify the cache. It was pulling data from all linked devices, including Elena's personal phone. The most recent album was not Italy or House Ideas. It was a folder simply labeled Project. I tapped it, expecting to see screenshots of furniture or color palettes for the new house she was desperate to buy. Elena had been relentless about Winter Hill, a crumbling Victorian estate on the edge of the city. She wanted it with a hunger that frightened me. I thought this folder was just her way of organizing her dream. The first image was a screenshot of a text conversation. I adjusted my glasses, squinting. The contact name at the top was Greg, Realtor. Greg, he's hesitating again. The market analysis I sent him should have scared him into a decision. Elena, he's not scared, he's just analytical. He overthinks every dollar. It's exhausting. I just want to be in the house already. Greg, patience, babe. Once he signs, the clock starts. We get the renovation budget approved. I bring in my guys. We inflate the costs, and you get the palace you deserve. And we get our playground. I stared at the words. My brain, usually so quick to categorize data, stalled. I read it again. We inflate the costs. Our playground. I swiped to the next image. It was a photo taken inside a car. Elena was in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, smiling a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Predatory, excited, conspiratorial. The driver was cut out of the frame, but a hand was resting on her knee. A man's hand. On the wrist was a heavy gold watch. A watch I had seen before. Greg Stevens, the realtor who had been showing us properties for 6 months. I swiped again. Another text chain. Elena, he's so boring, Greg. I watched him stare at blueprints for 2 hours last night. He talks about structural integrity, and I just want to scream. I need a man who knows how to live, not just exist. Greg, don't worry. He's the wallet. I'm the life. Let him buy the house. Let him pour his millions into fixing that rot trap. In this state, after 5 years of marriage, you own half the appreciation. We get him to fix it up, you file for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, and we cash out. Or better yet, we keep the house and kick him out. Elena, you're bad. I love it. Greg, I'm just a businessman, and you're the best investment I've ever made. I sat there. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window pane, a relentless, indifferent Morse code. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. It was a strange physiological reaction, one of absolute, freezing calm. It was the feeling of standing in a building when you hear the primary support beam snap, a sound that isn't loud, but deep, vibrating through the soles of your feet. You know the collapse is coming. Panic is useless. You simply assess the trajectory of the fall. I swiped through 10, 20, 50 images. They mock my clothes. They mock the way I spoke. They planned the renovations of the Winter Hill estate specifically to suit their tastes, discussing a master bedroom layout that involved mirrors on the ceiling, something Elena had told me she found tacky when I suggested a modern design last year. They discussed how to manipulate me. Tell him it's a good investment for his firm's portfolio, Greg had advised. Play on his ego. There were no explicit pictures, thank God. I didn't need to see that. The betrayal wasn't about the flesh. It was about the architecture of my life. They were termite-ridden beams painted over with white gloss. They were planning to use my labor, my money, my reputation to build a nest for themselves and then discard me like construction debris. I looked at the timestamp of the last message. It was sent 20 minutes ago, while I was sitting here working, while she was showering. I heard the water turn off upstairs. My finger hovered over the delete button. If I deleted them, I could pretend I never saw them. I could go upstairs, demand an explanation, scream, throw her out. But then I looked at the text about the money. We inflate the costs. We cash out. If I confronted her now, she would deny it. She would claim they were jokes. She would delete the messages from her phone. She would play the victim. In a divorce court, without hard proof of financial conspiracy, she would still get half. She would walk away with my money and laugh about it in a new apartment with Greg. No, the architect in me took over. When a building is condemned, you do not attack it with a hammer in a fit of rage. That is dangerous. It creates dust and unpredictable debris. You plan a controlled demolition. You weaken the supports systematically. You drill holes for the charges. You clear the perimeter. And then, when everything is in place, you press the button. I forwarded every screenshot, every photo, every audio file to a secure, encrypted server I use for archiving sensitive project data. Then, I carefully deleted the local copies from the iPad, clearing the cache so it looked exactly as it had before the sync error. I placed the iPad back on the table, aligning it perfectly parallel with the edge of the wood. Footsteps on the stairs. Soft, padded slippers. David. Her voice was melodious, the voice of the woman I thought I knew. Are you still working? You promised we'd watch a movie. I turned my chair. Elena stood in the doorway, wrapped in a plush white robe, a towel turbaned around her head. Her face was scrubbed clean, glowing and pink from the heat. She looked innocent. She looked beautiful. She looked like a lie. I said. My voice sounded normal. It surprised me. Just finishing up a review of the foundation specs for the library. It's tricky soil. Lots of hidden instability. She walked over and draped her arms around my neck from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. I smelled her expensive vanilla lotion. It used to be a scent that comforted me. Now it smelled like a chemical masking agent. You worry too much about instability, she whispered, glancing at the iPad on the table. You need to focus on building something for us. Did you call Greg about Winter Hill? He texted me today, asking if you were ready to commit. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten, but I forced them to relax. I reached up and patted her hand, cold flesh against warm. I was just thinking about that, I said. I think you're right. We've been too cautious. Maybe it's time to take a risk. She squeezed my shoulders, delighted. Really? You mean it? I mean it, I lied. Let's go see it tomorrow. One last look. If the structure is manageable, I'll sign the papers. Oh, David, she kissed my cheek. You won't regret it. It's going to be our masterpiece. Yes, I said, staring at the dark reflection of the window. It certainly will be. The next morning, the sky was the color of a bruised plum. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof of my Audi as we drove out of the city and into the affluent, older suburbs where the trees were thick and the driveways were long. Elena was chatting animatedly in the passenger seat. She had brought a notebook and was already sketching ideas for the garden. Greg says the soil there is perfect for hydrangeas, she chirped. And he knows a contractor who could do the landscaping for half the usual price. I bet he does, I said, keeping my eyes on the wet asphalt. Greg seems to know a lot of people. He's just well-connected, honey. That's what you want in a realtor. We pulled up to the iron gates of Winter Hill. I had to admit, the property had a Gothic charisma. It sat on a rise, overlooking a gray valley. The house was a Victorian monstrosity of turrets, wraparound porches, and peeling paint. It had been empty for 3 years. To the untrained eye, it was romantic, a fixer-upper with soul. To me, it looked like a drowning victim gasping for air. A black Mercedes was already parked in the driveway. Greg Stevens was leaning against the hood, holding a large black umbrella. He was a handsome man in a superficial way, polished teeth, manicured stubble, a suit that was slightly too tight, emphasizing time spent in a gym rather than a library. He waved as we approached. I parked and turned off the engine. For a second, I just sat there, listening to the engine cool. Ready? Elena asked, her hand on the door handle. Ready, I said. I stepped out into the rain. Greg walked over, extending a hand. His grip was firm, practiced. The handshake of a man who sells illusions. David, good to see you again, Greg said, his voice booming with false conviviality. And Elena, radiant as always, even in this weather. Hi, Greg, she said. There was a frequency in her voice that I hadn't noticed before, a slight breathlessness. She didn't look at him directly, which was the biggest tell of all. They were playing the game of strangers. So, Greg said, gesturing with the umbrella toward the looming house. The beast awaits. I had another couple look at it yesterday, David. Very interested. Tech money. They want to tear it down and build a glass box. I told them, no, this house needs a visionary. It needs an architect who respects history. He was laying it on thick. Flattery. Urgency. The classic sales tactics. Let's go inside, I said shortly. I want to see the basement first. Greg's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The basement? Sure. It's a bit damp down there, but the bones are good. We entered through the heavy oak front doors. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust and trapped moisture. The foyer was grand, with a sweeping staircase that looked impressive until you noticed the slight sag in the treads. Look at this woodwork, Elena said, running her hand along the banister. They don't make them like this anymore. They don't, I agreed, looking at the water stains on the ceiling. Because building codes evolved. We went down to the basement. It was a cavernous space, dimly lit by a few bare bulbs Greg had strung up. The walls were stone, weeping with condensation. I took out my flashlight, a high-lumen industrial beam that cut through the shadows. I walked to the main support beams. They were massive timbers, old-growth cedar. But as I ran the light along the joints where the wood met the stone foundation, I saw it. The darkening, the softness. Dry rot was setting in, and worse, there were signs of previous insect damage that had been cosmetically patched over with wood filler and painted. It looked solid, Greg said, standing behind me. I had an inspector look at it last week. He gave a clean bill of health. I turned the light on him. He blinked, shielding his eyes. Which inspector? I asked. Bob Miller. Best in the county. I knew Bob Miller. He was a man who would pass a cardboard box as a bunker if you slipped him $500. Interesting, I said. I moved the light back to the beam. I took out a penknife and pressed it gently into the wood. The blade sank in an inch with barely any resistance. Elena gasped. David, don't break it. I'm not breaking it, I said calmly. It's already broken. The foundation has shifted. See this crack in the floor? I traced a jagged line running under the furnace. The house is sliding very slowly down the hill. To fix this, you need to underpin the entire structure. Hydraulic jacks, new concrete, steel reinforcements. It would cost more than the house is worth. The room went silent. I could hear Greg's breathing shift. He was calculating. If I walked away, his commission was gone. His plan with Elena was gone. Well, Greg said, his voice tighter, that's a worst-case scenario. With your expertise, David, surely you can find a cost-effective solution. That's why Elena wants this place. She believes in your talent. He looked at Elena. She looked at me, her eyes wide, pleading. Please, David, she said. I can see our life here. I can see the Christmas parties. I can see everything. Don't let a few cracks stop us. You can fix anything. You can fix anything. The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. She was asking me to use my skill to build the trap she intended to catch me in. I looked at the rotting beam. I looked at the shifting floor. And then I looked at the two of them. If I bought this house, I would be buying a disaster. A financial black hole. But if I bought this house, I would own the disaster. An idea began to form in the back of my mind. A cold, geometric design. If I controlled the asset, I controlled the narrative. If the house was truly dangerous, and it was, then certain legal obligations would arise. Obligations that could be manipulated. David, Elena asked, her voice trembling. Are we leaving? I folded the penknife and put it back in my pocket. I turned to them and smiled. It was the hardest thing I had ever done physically, forcing the corners of my mouth up when every instinct screamed to snarl. No, I said, we're not leaving. Greg's shoulders dropped in relief. You think you can save it? I think, I said, choosing my words with the precision of a laser cutter, that this house presents a unique opportunity. It requires a radical approach. But yes, I see the potential. Oh, thank God. Elena rushed to me, hugging me tightly. Over her shoulder, I saw Greg smirk. He winked at her back. He thought he had won. He thought the wallet had opened. What's the asking price again? I asked Greg, stepping back from Elena. 1.5 million, Greg said. But for you, I can probably talk the sellers down to 1.4. Quick close. 1.4, I repeated, and the renovation budget? Maybe 200,000? Elena suggested hopefully. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Elena, to make this place livable, you're looking at 500,000 minimum. We can manage that, Greg interjected quickly. The equity growth will cover it. Right, I said. The equity. I walked back up the stairs, leaving the damp darkness of the basement. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, looking up at the chandelier that was missing half its crystals. I needed to buy this house, but I couldn't buy it as David and Elena Mitchell, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If I did that, she owned half the moment I signed. I'll take it, I said. Elena squealed. Greg clapped his hands. But I raised a finger. I have conditions. Greg's smile froze. Conditions? My firm has had a very profitable year, I lied. My accountant has been hounding me to reinvest capital into company assets to offset the tax liability. If I buy this house personally, I get hit with income tax on the money I withdraw. It makes no financial sense. I walked over to the window, wiping a circle in the condensation to look out at the rain-soaked yard. I want to buy the property through a new LLC, I said, a subsidiary of my architectural firm. The company buys the house. The company pays for the renovation as a showcase project. We live here as caretakers and primary tenants. It saves us nearly 30% in taxes. Elena looked confused. But will it still be our house? Of course. I turned to her, putting warmth into my eyes. It's just paperwork, honey. It means we have more money to spend on the Italian marble you want for the kitchen. You want the marble, don't you? Yes, she breathed. And you, Greg. I turned to him. You don't care who signs the check, do you? As long as it clears. Greg hesitated. He was smart enough to know that an LLC purchased complicated things for a divorce settlement, but not smart enough to know exactly how. He looked at Elena. She was nodding enthusiastically, thinking about the marble. He calculated that he could still manipulate Elena later, maybe get her to pressure me to put her name on the deed after the renovation. Creative, Greg said slowly. I like it. A corporate purchase. Very sophisticated. I'll have my lawyer draw up the offer today, I said. But Elena, since the company is taking the risk, the board, which is just me and my partner, requires all residents to sign a standard liability waiver and a tenancy agreement, just acknowledging that the property is a commercial asset under development. Standard stuff. Anything, Elena said. I'll sign anything. I just want this house. I just want this house. Then it's done, I said. We shook hands again. This time, I squeezed Greg's hand a little harder. Not enough to hurt, just enough to show that there was structure beneath the skin. As we drove away, leaving Greg behind in the rain, Elena was giddy. She was texting furiously on her phone. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who she was texting. He bought it. He actually bought it. We won. I turned on the radio to drown out the sound of her typing. I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. It was the peace of the drawing board. The chaos of emotions was gone. Now it was just a project. Step 1, acquisition. Step 2, evacuation. Step 3, demolition. She wanted a house. I would give her a house. I would give her exactly what she asked for. The reality of Winter Hill, stripped of all its illusions. David, she said, put her phone down. You're so quiet. Are you happy? I glanced at her. The woman who had slept in my bed for 5 years. The woman who was currently calculating how much alimony she could extract from my future. I'm just thinking about the renovation, I said softly. I have some very specific ideas about how to open up the space. I want to remove the walls. All of them. Open concept, she clapped. I love it. Yes, I said, tightening my grip on the steering wheel. Open concept. We're going to tear it all down to the ground. She smiled, hearing only what she wanted to hear. I drove on through the rain, the windshield wipers slicing back and forth like a metronome, counting down the time remaining on her perfectly planned life. The paperwork would be ready by tomorrow. The trap was set, and the beautiful thing was she was going to walk into it holding my hand, thinking she was the one leading me. The foundation of lies was laid. Now it was time to build. Contracts are not just pieces of paper. They're the steel reinforcement bars of society. When poured into the wet concrete of human interaction, they provide the rigidity that keeps civilization from slumping into chaos. I have always found comfort in a well-drafted contract. It defines the load, the stress points, and the penalties for failure. People often look at the signature line as the most important part of a document, but that is a mistake. The signature is just a facade. The structural integrity lies in the definitions, the indemnities, and the exclusions. The small print is where the true power resides. 3 days after I discovered my wife's infidelity and her plan to dismantle my life, I sat in the corner office of Marcus Thorne, my corporate attorney and oldest friend. The view from his window was a panorama of Seattle's skyline, a testament to vertical ambition. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the city into a watercolor of grays and blues. Marcus was reading the documents I had drafted. He was a man who communicated primarily through raised eyebrows and heavy sighs. He had been my legal counsel since I started my firm, and he knew how my mind worked. He knew I did not make impulsive decisions. He flipped a page, the crisp sound cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. He looked up over his reading glasses. David, he said, his voice measured. This is aggressive, even for you. You are essentially creating a shell company to purchase a residential property, but you're classifying the property as a distressed commercial asset aimed for total site redevelopment. I took a sip of the sparkling water he had offered me. That is correct, I said. Marcus tapped the paper. And this clause here, the tenant waiver of rights. You are asking Elena to sign a document that classifies her status not as a co-owner, and not even as a standard residential tenant, but as a temporary occupant of a construction site, subject to eviction on 24 hours notice for safety reasons. Safety reasons, I repeated calmly. The house is rotting. Marcus, you saw the inspection report I created. The foundation is unstable. It is a safety hazard. I am merely protecting the company from liability. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair. He studied my face looking for the cracks, looking for the emotion that should have been there. He knew Elena. He had been to our wedding. He knew I loved her, or at least that I had loved the version of her I thought existed. "You are planning to divorce her," Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. "I am planning to restructure my assets." I corrected him. "Divorce is a messy, emotional term. This is a liquidation of a failed partnership." Marcus sighed again, but this time there was a hint of professional admiration in it. He picked up his gold pen. "You know, if she hires a competent lawyer, they might try to pierce the corporate veil. They might argue that this LLC, Phoenix Project, you called it, is just an alter ego for you." "They might," I agreed. "But by the time they do that, the asset will no longer exist. And the debts incurred by the asset will be shared." "She wants the house, Marcus. She is desperate for it. She won't read the fine print. She believes she is the one manipulating me. She thinks I'm doing this to save on taxes." Marcus shook his head slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "You are a cold son of a gun, David." I stood up and walked to the window. I wasn't cold. I was burning. But I had learned long ago that fire, when contained within a furnace, generates power. When let loose, it just creates ash. I preferred power. "I need you to finalize the incorporation papers by noon," I said, "and I need the transfer of funds to be untraceable to my personal accounts. Use the offshore hold." "Done," Marcus said. "But David, be careful. When you tear down a house, make sure you aren't standing inside it." I left his office and stepped out into the drizzling street. The city felt different to me now. Before, I walked these streets as a participant. Now, I felt like an observer, a ghost haunting my own life. I had one more stop to make before the grand performance of signing the papers. I needed sanctuary. If I was going to destroy Winter Hill, I needed a place to go when the dust settled. I could not stay in a hotel. It was too transient. I needed a fortress. I had spent the last 2 nights scouring real estate listings, looking for something that was the antithesis of the Victorian monstrosity Elena wanted. I found it in the Arts District, a building called the Spire. It was new, industrial, and sterile. Concrete floors, exposed ductwork, floor-to-ceiling glass. No history, no boasts. I met the leasing agent at 2 o'clock. She was a young woman who talked too fast, but I didn't mind. I walked into the penthouse unit. It was empty. The air smelled of fresh paint and ozone. It was perfect. "I'll take it," I said, cutting off her speech about the amenities. She blinked. "Don't you want to see the gym? Or the roof deck?" "No," I said. "I want to sign a 2-year lease. Today. And I want a second unit. A smaller one, on a lower floor." "A second unit?" she asked, confused. "For guests?" "For storage," I lied. "My firm has a lot of archives." I signed the leases using a different holding company, one I'd set up years ago for a patent application that never went through. By 3 o'clock, I had the keys. I stood in the center of the silent, gray apartment. It was a blank canvas. That evening, I began the process of extraction. I told Elena that, in preparation for the move to Winter Hill and the subsequent renovation, we needed to clear out the clutter from our current house. I told her I was renting a climate-controlled storage unit for my valuable items. My collection of first-edition architectural books, my vintage vinyl records, my grandfather's drafting tools. She was delighted. "Oh, that's a great idea, David," she had said, barely looking up from her phone. She was likely texting Greg. "Get that dusty old stuff out of the way. We want a fresh start." A fresh start. The irony was almost delicious. I spent the next few hours packing boxes. But I wasn't sending them to a storage unit. I was driving them, load by load, to the Spire. I moved my soul, box by box, out of our marital home and into my secret bunker. When I placed my turntable on the concrete floor of the new apartment and plugged it in, playing a few bars of Miles Davis to test the acoustics, I felt the first true breath of freedom I had taken in days. I was bifurcating my life. David the husband was a shell, a hologram living in a house of lies. David the architect was already living here, in the clean, hard reality of the future. The next day was the signing. We met at the title company's office. The conference room was generic, smelling of stale coffee and photocopier toner. Elena was dressed in a white suit, looking like a bride. She was vibrating with excitement. Greg was there, of course. He sat next to her, not touching her, but their energy was entangled. He wore a suit that was too shiny, and his watch seemed to tick louder than the clock on the wall. I sat opposite them. On my side of the table sat Marcus, looking grave and formidable. "Let's get this done," Greg said, rubbing his hands together. "Big day for the Mitchells." Marcus placed a stack of documents on the table. It was thick. "We have structured this purchase, as discussed, through the Phoenix Project LLC," Marcus announced. "This offers David and Elena maximum protection from personal liability. However, because it is a corporate purchase of a distressed asset, the paperwork is slightly different from a standard residential mortgage." Elena waved her hand dismissively. "I don't care about the boring stuff. Just show me where to sign so I can get my keys." Marcus slid the document toward her. He didn't flip to the signature page immediately. He paused, his hand resting on the cover. "Mrs. Mitchell, as your husband's counsel, I must advise you to read the section regarding tenancy. Since the company owns the building, you are technically signing a caretaker agreement. It acknowledges that the property is under development and that you waive standard tenant rights in exchange for rent-free living." Elena looked at me. Her eyes were bright, impatient. "David, what is he talking about? Is this going to stop me from decorating?" "No," I said softly. I looked her right in the eyes. "It just means the company handles the heavy lifting, the structural work, the demolition of the bad parts. It means you don't have to worry about the foundation. I'll take care of all of that." She smiled, a smile of pure relief and entitlement. "See, David handles it. He's the builder." She grabbed the pen. Greg leaned in. "Standard corporate shield, Elena. It's actually smart. If the roof collapses, you don't get sued, the company does." He was trying to sound knowledgeable, trying to assert his dominance in the room. He had no idea he was tightening the noose around his own neck. Elena signed. She signed her name with a flourish, the loops of her letters large and confident. She signed the deed transfer. She signed the caretaker agreement. She signed the waiver. She signed away her claim to the land, her claim to the equity, and her claim to the future. Then it was my turn. I signed as the director of Phoenix Project LLC. My signature was small, sharp, jagged. "Congratulations," the title officer said, stamping the final page. "You are the proud owners of the property at Winter Hill." Elena jumped up and hugged me. It was a performance. I felt her heart beating against my chest, but it felt like a mechanical pump. "Thank you, honey. You won't regret this. It's going to be amazing." I looked over her shoulder at Greg. He gave me a thumbs up. A smirk played on his lips. He was thinking about the commission check. He was thinking about how easy I was. "I'm sure it will be," I said. After the signing, Elena suggested a celebratory dinner. I declined. "I have to go to the site," I said. "I want to meet the contractor to discuss the preliminary timeline. I want to get started immediately." "You're so obsessed." Elena loves it. "Fine, go play with your bricks. Greg and Greg can probably drop me off at home." "I'm sure he can," I said. I watched them walk to the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw Greg's hands slide down to the small of her back. They thought they were invisible. I turned to Marcus. "File the papers," I said. "Immediately." "Consider done," Marcus said. He looked at me with a mixture of concern and respect. "You know, David, there is no turning back now. Once we record the deed, the asset is locked." "Good," I said. I drove to Winter Hill alone. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and reflective. The house loomed against the twilight sky, a silhouette of jagged peaks and rot. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at it. It was mine now, not ours. Mine. I took out my phone and dialed Greg's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, David. Just dropped Elena off. She's on cloud 9. I need you to meet me at the house, Greg," I said. My voice was tight, stressed. "Now." But I just left. "Now," I said. "It's important. It's about the renovation budget. I think we have a problem with the financing." I hung up. I knew that would bring him. Greed is a powerful summoner. 20 minutes later, Greg's Mercedes crunched up the gravel driveway. He got out, looking annoyed but trying to hide it. "What's going on, David?" he asked, walking up to the porch where I was standing. "I thought the deal was done." "It is," I said, "but I've been running the numbers. The bank backing the LLC. They're getting cold feet about the renovation loan. They think the house isn't worth the investment. They want to limit the construction draw. Greg's face fell. That's ridiculous. This house is a gold mine. I lied. But I need to prove it to them. Or rather, I need to prove that the house needs more work than they think to justify a larger loan tier. If we tell them it just needs paint and polish, they'll give us pennies. But if we tell them— I paused, looking at him. If we tell them what? Greg asked. If we tell them a structure is critically compromised, I said. If we submit a report stating that the foundation is failing and requires emergency intervention, I can unlock the hazardous asset fund. That's triple the budget, Greg. That means more money for materials, more money for contractors, more money for everyone. Greg's eyes lit up. He understood the language of fraud. He thought I was inviting him into a conspiracy to inflate the loan. You want to cook the inspection report? Greg asked, a grin spreading across his face. I want to be realistic, I said. You have a background in construction, don't you? You still have your contractor's license? Yeah, I do, he said, puffed up. I need you to sign an independent assessment. I've already drafted it based on my observations. It states that the load-bearing walls are compromised by dry rot and that the chimney is a seismic hazard. It recommends immediate structural remediation, including potential partial demolition. Partial demolition? Greg asked. That sounds extreme. It's just language for the bank, Greg, I reassured him. It scares them into releasing the funds. We won't actually tear it down. We just need the paper to say we might have to. It gives us carte blanche with a budget. Greg laughed. David, you sly dog. I didn't think you had it in you. I thought you were strictly by the book. I looked at the rotting porch railing. This house changes people, I said. So will you sign it? It validates your expertise. It puts you in charge of the assessment. Absolutely, Greg said. Where is it? I pulled the clipboard from my bag. The document was titled Structural Integrity Assessment and Hazard Report. It was filled with technical jargon that Greg barely skimmed. He saw the words estimated budget requirement, $600,000, and his eyes glazed over with dollar signs. He didn't focus on the paragraph that granted the owner absolute discretion to raise the structure in the event of safety failure. He took my pen. He signed his name. Greg Stevens, licensed contractor. Thanks, Greg, I said, taking the clipboard back. You just saved the project. Anytime, partner, he said, clapping me on the back. We're going to make this place a palace. Elena is going to be so happy. I watched him drive away. The taillights of his car disappeared into the darkness. I looked down at the clipboard. I now had a document, signed by the very man sleeping with my wife, stating that the house was a death trap. He had just given me the legal weapon I needed. He thought he was helping me steal from a bank. In reality, he had just given me permission to destroy his playground. I walked into the empty house. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors. I walked into the living room, where Elena had envisioned a grand piano. I walked into the kitchen, where she wanted a chef's island. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom, where she planned to put a king-size bed and mirrors on the ceiling. I stood in the center of the room. I took a deep breath. The air was musty, heavy with the smell of decay. I didn't feel sadness anymore. The sadness had been processed, packaged, and stored away in the back of my mind. Now, I felt a grim sense of purpose. I took out my phone and called the demolition company. It was after hours, but I had the personal number of the owner, a man named Miller, who owed me a favor from a zoning dispute years ago. Miller, I said when he answered. David, it's late. Everything okay? Everything is proceeding according to schedule, I said. I have the site possession. I have the ownership papers. And I have a certified hazard report signed by a third-party contractor declaring the structure unsafe. Okay, Miller said, sounding confused. So what do you need? I need to book a crew, I said. Not for a renovation. For a total site clearance. Whoa, Miller said. You mean a teardown? I thought you bought that place to live in. Plans change, I said. The report says it's dangerous. I can't risk my family's safety in a house that might collapse, can I? I guess not, Miller said. When do you want to do it? Next weekend, I said. Elena's going to spa. I'll make sure the house is empty. I want it done fast. In and out. By the time she gets back, I want nothing left but the dirt. You're the boss, David. Just send me the permits. I'll have them on your desk by Monday, I said. I hung up. I stood there in the dark for a long time. I reached out and touched the wall. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing layers of old paint underneath. Blue, then yellow, then a faded floral pattern from the 1950s. Lives have been lived here, memories made, and now, because of the greed of two people, it was all going to be erased. I wasn't just destroying a house. I was performing an exorcism. I left the house and locked the front door. The key felt heavy in my pocket. I got into my car and drove toward the city, toward the spire, toward my small, gray box of truth. Elena texted me as I was driving. Elena, dinner was fun. Greg is so excited about the project. He says you guys have a secret plan to make the house even better. Love you. I glanced at the message. A secret plan? Yes, we certainly did. I didn't reply. I turned up the music, the jazz trumpet cutting through the silence of the cabin. The road ahead was wet and dark, but for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I was going. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The ink was dry. Now, all I had to do was wait for the hammer to fall. And the beautiful thing about gravity is that it is inevitable. You can build all the facades you want. You can paint over the cracks. You can lie to the world and to yourself. But sooner or later, the structure fails. And when it does, the only thing that matters is who is standing on solid ground. I pulled into the underground garage of the spire. The concrete walls were thick and reassuring. I parked my car and took the elevator up to the 30th floor. I entered my apartment, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, lay Winter Hill. Enjoy it while it lasts. Elena, I whispered to the glass. Enjoy the dream. Because waking up is going to be very, very loud. I went to the small kitchenette and poured myself a glass of water. I sat down on the single chair I had brought from the old house. I opened my laptop and pulled up the architectural rendering software. I didn't open the file for the library I was building. I opened a new file. I imported the survey map of the Winter Hill lot. I deleted the house from the plot. The screen showed a flat, green rectangle. Empty space. I began to draw. Not a house. Not a building. I drew a garden. A complex, intricate labyrinth of hedges and stone paths. A place where you could walk and think. A place with no roof to hide under. I worked until dawn, designing the void where my marriage used to be. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever designed. The human instinct to nest is a powerful biological imperative. I've seen it in my clients 100 times. It usually begins the moment the ink dries on the deed. There's a frantic energy to fill the space, to mark the territory with scents and colors and fabrics that scream mine. It is an attempt to impose order on a vacuum. Elena was no different. In fact, she was the archetype. For the first week after the signing, Winter Hill became her universe. She did not live in the reality of the rotting wood or the shifting foundation. She lived in the glossy projection of what the house would become. She walked through the drafty corridors with a tape measure hooked to her belt, her voice echoing off the peeling wallpaper as she dictated instructions to imaginary workmen. She saw potential where I saw pathology. She saw a grand dining room. I saw a floor joist that had been eaten away by termites in the late 90s. She saw a nursery. I saw a room with lead paint peeling from the ceiling like dead skin. I watched her with the detachment of a scientist observing a specimen in a petri dish. I was no longer a participant in her life. I was the curator of her downfall. And the most terrifying part of it all was how easy it was to play the role of the supportive husband. I nodded when she showed me swatches of velvet. I smiled when she talked about the energy of the library. I agreed that, yes, a skylight would indeed open up the attic, all while knowing that the only thing opening up that roof would be the claw of an excavator. The deception required maintenance, however. To keep her calm, I had to simulate progress. I told her that the restoration would happen in phases. Phase 1, I explained, was the preservation and extraction phase. You see, Elena, I told her over dinner one evening, slicing my steak with surgical precision. This house is a historic asset. We cannot just let the construction crew trample over the original features. The stained glass, the marble mantels, the copper light fixtures. If we leave them in during the structural work, they will be damaged. We need to extract them, catalog them, send them to a climate-controlled facility for restoration. Then, when the dirty work is done, we bring them back. Her eyes lit up. She loved the sound of it. Preservation. Restoration. It sounded expensive. It sounded aristocratic. "Oh, David, you're so thoughtful," she exclaimed. "I was worried about the chandelier in the foyer. Greg said we should just wrap it in plastic, but taking it down is so much safer." Greg, I thought. Of course Greg would suggest plastic. He was a man of cheap solutions. "We start tomorrow," I said. "I've hired a specialist team. They're going to strip the interior of everything valuable. It will look bare for a while, honey. It will look dead, but it's necessary to save the soul of the house." It wasn't a lie. I was saving the value, just not for the house. The next morning, the trucks arrived, but they weren't restoration experts. They were salvage liquidators. I had contacted an architectural salvage firm from Portland, a company that paid cash for vintage fixtures. I wasn't paying them to store the items. I was selling the items to them. Elena stood on the porch, clutching her coffee cup, watching as men in jumpsuits carefully pried the 19th century hand-carved mantelpiece from the living room wall. "Be careful," she called out. "That's rosewood." "Don't worry, ma'am," the foreman said, winking at me. "We treat it like gold." I stood beside her, my hand on the small of her back. The touch was mechanical. I watched as they carried out the heart of the house. The fireplace is the symbolic center of a home. It is where the warmth comes from. When they pried it loose, a cloud of black soot puffed out into the room, settling on the floor like a dark omen. Behind the mantel, the brick was exposed, raw and ugly. "It looks so empty," Elena whispered, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "It's just temporary," I assured her. "We are clearing the canvas. You can't paint a masterpiece on a dirty surface." By the end of the day, the house was a skeleton. The crystal chandeliers were gone, leaving wires dangling from the ceiling like severed nerves. The solid oak doors with their brass knobs were unhinged and loaded into the truck. The stained glass window on the landing, a beautiful depiction of a heron in flight, was carefully removed, leaving a gaping hole covered by plywood. The house was now truly hollow. It echoed differently. The sound was flat, harsh. Without the soft edges of the wood and the curtains, the wind whistled through the cracks with a mournful tone. The salvage foreman handed me an envelope before he left. Inside was a cashier's check for $45,000. "For the preservation fund," he said with a grin. I put the check in my jacket pocket. It would cover the cost of the demolition crew. The house was literally paying for its own funeral. That weekend, Elena insisted on a party. A before party, she announced. "We need to christen the house. Just a few close friends. Pizza and champagne on the floor. It will be bohemian. It will be romantic." I tried to dissuade her. The electricity was spotty, the heating was turned off, and the house smelled of disturbed dust and old secrets. But she was adamant. She wanted to show off her prize. She wanted to plant her flag. And, of course, she wanted Greg to be there. The evening of the party, the rain returned. It lashed against the plywood-covered windows, drumming a frantic rhythm. The guests arrived, a mix of Elena's social climber friends and a few of my bewildered colleagues who couldn't understand why I bought a ruin. We set up camping lanterns in the living room because the overhead lights were gone. The shadows stretched long and distorted across the bare plaster walls. People sat on folding chairs or stood in clusters, holding plastic cups of expensive champagne. Greg was the center of attention. Naturally, he was telling a story about the history of the house, fabricating details about a rum-running baron who used to live here in the 20s. He wore a cashmere sweater and leaned against the wall where the fireplace used to be, acting as if he had built the place himself. "David," Greg called out across the room, raising his glass. "You're being too quiet over there in the corner. Come join the circle. Tell us about the vision." I walked into the light of the lanterns. My shadow fell over them. "The vision is simple," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily in the empty acoustic space. "Structural purity." Greg laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. Spoken like a true architect. Always so serious. But seriously, everyone, look at this place. David saw the diamond in the rough. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have said it's too much work. But David? He committed. He winked at Elena. She beamed at him, her face flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. "To Winter Hill," she toasted, raising her cup. "To Winter Hill, The guests echoed. I raised my cup. To the foundation, I said. May we always know what lies beneath us. A few people chuckled, thinking it was a dry witticism. Elena just smiled, missing the warning entirely. But Greg's eyes narrowed slightly. For a second, just a second, he looked at me with a question in his gaze. He sensed something. The air in the room was too heavy, too charged. But then his ego took over again, dismissing the thought. He couldn't conceive of a world where he wasn't the smartest person in the room. Later in the evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen, or what was left of it. The cabinets had been stripped. It was just a room with pipes sticking out of the wall. Greg wandered in, looking for another bottle of wine. Great party, David, he said, leaning against the counter that wasn't there. You know, Elena is really happy. I haven't seen her this lit up in years. I looked at him. He was trying to be buddy-buddy. He was trying to normalize his presence in my house. She likes projects, I said. She likes the idea of transformation. Yeah, well, you're giving her a hell of a project. Listen, about the contractor for the framing. I have a guy who owes me a favor. He can come in next week, start shoring up those load-bearing walls we put in the report. There was no need for shoring up. The report was a fabrication we had both signed. But Greg was greedy. He wanted a double dip. He wanted to get paid for fixing the fake problems he had helped document. I'm handling the framing, Greg, I said coldly. My firm has internal teams. We don't need outsiders. He stiffened. Just trying to help, man. We're all on the same team here. Are we? I asked. He laughed nervously. Of course. Team Winterhill. He grabbed a bottle of Pinot Noir and retreated to the living room, back to the adoration of the women. I stayed in the dark kitchen. I could hear their laughter. It sounded like the scratching of rats in the walls. Team Winterhill. I checked my watch. It was almost time for the next phase. The party wound down around midnight. The guests stumbled out into the rain to their Ubers. Elena was tipsy, leaning heavily on my arm as we locked the front door, or rather, padlocked the temporary construction door I had installed. That was magical, she slurred as we got into the car. I can feel the ghosts, David. Good ghosts. Yes, I said, starting the engine. The ghosts are definitely awake. The drive back to our current home, the one we were ostensibly moving out of, was silent. Elena fell asleep against the window. I drove with a clarity of purpose that frightened me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was simply executing a program. The next morning, the financial clamp began. I had timed this carefully. We were 3 days away from the spa weekend. I had gifted Elena a package at an exclusive wellness retreat in the Cascades for the upcoming weekend. I told her she needed to relax before the heavy construction began, to get away from the dust and the noise. She had accepted it eagerly, inviting her sister to join her. But before she left, I needed to ensure she couldn't come back. Not easily. And I needed to ensure that if she tried to stop me, she would have no resources to do so. I was in the study when she burst in, holding her phone. She looked pale. David, something is wrong, she said. I didn't look up from my laptop. What is it? I just tried to order the bathroom tiles. The ones on sale. My credit card was declined. I typed a few keys, feigning distraction. Which card? The Amex. The Platinum one. So I tried the Visa. That one was declined too. It says refer to issuer. I stopped typing. I took off my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose, performing the role of the stressed businessman. I said, I was going to tell you about that tonight. Tell me what? Why are my cards blocked? It's the bank, Elena. The commercial loan for the house. What does the loan have to do with my credit cards? I stood up and walked over to her, guiding her to a chair. I sat her down. Listen, honey, because we bought Winter Hill through the Phoenix Project LLC, and because the hazard report, the one Greg signed, showed such significant structural risk, the bank's risk assessment algorithms got triggered. They view the company as highly leveraged. She stared at me blankly. She didn't understand finance. She only understood spending. What does that mean in English? She snapped. It means, I explained patiently, that to secure the renovation funds, the money to fix the house, the bank required a liquidity freeze. They insisted that all personal assets linked to the guarantors, that's me and you, be temporarily locked as collateral. They need to see that we aren't spending cash while the asset is in peril. You're kidding, she said. You mean I can't buy anything? Just for a few days, I lied smoothie. Until the bank inspector verifies the start of construction. Once the demo permit is active and the site is secured, they unlock the funds. It's standard procedure for high-risk commercial developments. I tried to fight it, but they were adamant. It was either freeze the cards or lose the house. She slumped in the chair. But I have a spa trip this weekend. How am I supposed to pay for extras? Massages? Wine? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of cash. $500. Take this, I said. It's petty cash I pulled from the firm before the freeze. It should cover your incidentals. The room and the treatments are already prepaid. Just try to be frugal for a few days. We're tight, Elena, but it's worth it for the dream, right? She looked at the cash, then at me. She was annoyed, but she bought it. The lie was wrapped in enough technical jargon to sound plausible, and she trusted my business acumen implicitly. She never checked the accounts. She never logged into the bank portal. She relied on the magic plastic card in her wallet. Fine, she sighed, stuffing the cash in her purse. But tell the bank they are idiots. I will, I said. The truth was, I hadn't just frozen the cards. I had severed the lines. I had transferred the bulk of our joint savings into a secure trust account for the LLC operations, leaving the personal checking account with a balance of $12. If she tried to hire a lawyer, if she tried to book a flight, if she tried to do anything, she would hit a wall. She was financially paralyzed. And Greg? I had a surprise for him, too. That afternoon, I called him. Greg, bad news, I said, sounding frantic. What? What happened? The bank. They're scrutinizing the contractor bids. They think the budget is too high. They want to bring in their own surveyor to double-check your hazard report. Silence on the other end. A thick, terrified silence. If an independent surveyor looked at the house, they would see that while it was in bad shape, it wasn't the imminent collapse danger zone Greg had claimed to get the bigger budget. That was fraud. Crap, Greg whispered. David, you can't let them do that. That report. I mean, we embellished a little, right? For the loan? I know, I said. I'm trying to stall them. But listen, the only way to stop the audit is to start the work immediately. If the dangerous parts are already demolished when they get there, they can't prove we lied. We need to destroy the evidence of the condition effectively. Greg hesitated. He was sweating. I could hear it in his voice. So, you want to start the demo now? He asked. Yes. I'm moving the schedule up. As soon as Elena leaves for the spa. I need to rip out those walls. Do it, Greg said. His voice was urgent now. Do whatever you have to do. Just don't let the bank audit that report. Perfect, I said. I'll handle it. I hung up. I had them both. Elena was neutralized by the financial freeze, thinking she was sacrificing for her dream home. Greg was neutralized by fear of prosecution, thinking he was covering his tracks. They were both cheering me on, urging me to destroy the very thing they wanted to steal from me. The day of the departure arrived. Friday morning. The sky was a slate gray, promising a storm. Elena pegs up ache. She looked glamorous, ready for a weekend of pampering. She kissed me at the door. It was a cold peck on the cheek. Don't work too hard, she said. And fix that bank thing. I want to buy those tiles on Monday. I will, I said. Have a wonderful time. Relax. Forget about everything. I watched her get into the Uber. She waved as the car pulled away. She didn't look back at the house she was leaving. She was looking at her phone, probably texting Greg, finally free. The miser gave me cash. Can you believe it? See you next week at the new house. I waited until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then, I turned and walked back inside. The house was quiet. I went to the kitchen and made a cup of coffee. I drank it standing up. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Miller, the demolition man. She's gone, I said. Copy that, Miller replied. My boys are loading up the excavators. We'll be on site at Winter Hill in 2 hours. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the folder of documents, the deed, the permits, the signed hazard report from Greg, the waiver from Elena. I drove to Winter Hill. When I arrived, the street was quiet. The house stood on the hill, looking down at me. It looked tired. It looked like it wanted to be put out of its misery. I unlocked the padlock on the construction fence. I opened the gates wide. 20 minutes later, I heard the rumble. It wasn't thunder. It was the deep diesel growl of heavy machinery. A flatbed truck turned the corner, carrying a massive yellow excavator on its back. Behind it, a dump truck and a crew van. Miller jumped out of the lead truck. He was a big man with a beard, wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest. "Ready to rock and roll?" he asked, spitting on the ground. I handed him the permit packet. "Everything is legal," I said. "Total remediation." Miller glanced at the paperwork. "Looks good to me. You want to save anything? The porch? The trim?" "No," I said. "It's all right." He nodded to his crew. I walked to a safe distance, standing near the old oak tree at the edge of the property line. I watched as the excavator rolled off the flatbed. Its tracks clanked loudly on the asphalt. It maneuvered into position, the diesel engine revving, sending a plume of black smoke into the gray air. The operator swung the cab around. The hydraulic arm extended. The bucket, massive and toothed, hovered over the front porch. The porch where Elena had stood and dreamed of sipping wine. The porch where Greg had shaken my hand and lied to my face. Miller looked at me for the signal. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I didn't think about the money. Money is a renewable resource. Dignity is not. I raised my hand and dropped it. The engine roared. The arm descended. Crack. The sound of wood splintering is distinct. It is the sound of structure failing. The bucket smashed through the roof of the porch as if it were made of matchsticks. Glass shattered. Dust exploded outward, a sudden, violent cloud that engulfed the front of the house. I watched as the bucket pulled back, tearing away a massive chunk of the facade. I could see into the living room now. I could see the wall where Greg had leaned. I could see the empty space where the fireplace had been. The excavator swung again. This time, it hit the main load-bearing wall. The house groaned, a deep, resonant sound of protest, and then a section of the second floor collapsed inward. It was mesmerizing. It was surgery. It was justice. I took a photo. Just one. A picture of the house with its face ripped off, the yellow arm of the machine buried deep in its chest. I didn't send it to anyone. Not yet. I stood there for hours, ignoring the rain that had started to fall. I watched until the roof was gone. I watched until the walls were flat. I watched until the Victorian dream was nothing but a pile of debris and twisted metal. By sunset, there was no winter hill. There was only a mound of trash and the smell of wet earth. I walked over to Miller, who was supervising the loading of the debris into the dump trucks. "Good work," I said. Miller wiped rain from his face. "Shame about the house. I had good bones." "No," I said. "It didn't. The bones were rotten. We just couldn't see them until we opened it up." I got back into my car. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Elena. A photo of her in a white robe, holding a glass of cucumber water, smiling. "Elena, paradise. Wish you were here, sort of. How is the house?" I looked at the pile of rubble in the rearview mirror. I typed back. "The house is undergoing a massive change. You won't recognize it." I hit send. I drove away, leaving the muddy tracks of the excavator behind me. I was heading to the spire, to my concrete box, to the silence. The demolition was complete. Now, the reconstruction of my life could begin. But first, there was the small matter of the unveiling. Elena was coming back in 2 days, and she was expecting a palace. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the text messages, the wallet, the playground. I turned up the radio. The news was playing something about the economy. I didn't care. I had created my own economy, an economy of consequences, and business was booming. In architecture, we talk about negative space. It is the area that surrounds the subject, the silence between the notes, the void that defines the solid. Most people ignore negative space. They focus on the walls, the roof, the tangible structure. But a good architect knows that the empty space is just as powerful as the built environment. It dictates flow. It commands perspective. On Sunday morning, I sat in the center of the most expensive negative space in Seattle. The sun had finally broken through the cloud cover, casting a pale, indifferent light over the site where Winter Hill had stood only 48 hours ago. The violence of the demolition was over. The excavators had done their work with terrifying efficiency. The debris, the centuries-old timber, the shattered glass, the slate roof tiles, the memories had been scooped up, loaded into dump trucks, and hauled away to a landfill in the next county. What remained was a flat, brown expanse of earth. I had instructed Miller's crew to grade the soil perfectly level. They had hydro-seeded the lot with a mixture of quick-growing grass and straw to prevent erosion, giving the ground a textured, agricultural look. It didn't look like a construction site. It looked like a park. It looked like a fresh grave. I sat on a single, white folding chair I had brought from the trunk of my car. Beside me was a thermos of black coffee. I was dressed in a suit, crisp and tailored, my shoes polished. I looked like I was waiting for a bus, except there was no bus stop, no street, no house. Just the mailbox at the end of the driveway, the only survivor, standing upright like a tombstone with the numbers 2401 gleaming in brass. It was 10 a.m. Elena's flight had landed at 8:30. She would have clear baggage claim by 9:15. The traffic on a Sunday morning was light. She was close. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter, grounding. I felt a strange vibration in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was the hum of a machine operating at peak capacity. I had run the simulations in my mind 1,000 times. I knew the variables. I knew the breaking points. My phone buzzed. A notification from the perimeter security system I had installed on the temporary fencing. Motion detected, driveway entrance. I didn't turn around immediately. I wanted to hear it first. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, the sound of vehicles slowing down, the engine idling uncertainly. Then the sound of a car door opening. "Driver, are you sure this is the right address?" Her voice. It was high, pitched with confusion. It floated across the empty lot, carried by the slight breeze. "GPS says 2401, lady. That's the mailbox." The driver's voice was gruff, impatient. "But there's nothing here. This is a field. We must have taken a wrong turn." "Look, I just drive. You want out or not?" I stood up then. I turned slowly, facing the road. I was about 50 yards away from the gate. Elena was standing by the open door of a yellow taxi. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat and sunglasses. She held a designer weekend bag. She looked impeccable, a woman returning to her castle. She took off her sunglasses. She squinted. She saw the mailbox. Then, her gaze traveled up the driveway, past the tire tracks in the mud, to the center of the lot. She saw me. For a moment, she didn't move. Her brain was rejecting the visual input. It's a common psychological defense mechanism. When reality is too traumatic, the mind simply refuses to process it. She was looking for the turret. She was looking for the porch. She was looking for the walls. She dropped her bag. It hit the wet gravel with a soft thud. "David!" Her scream was not loud. It was a gasp that escalated into a shriek. She began to run. She stumbled in her heels, almost falling, but she kept coming. She ran past the temporary fence onto the graded dirt. Her boots sank into the soft soil, ruining the leather, but she didn't care. "David, where is it? Where's the house?" She stopped 10 feet away from me, panting, her eyes wild. She spun around in a circle, looking at the empty horizon, the trees that bordered the property, the neighbor's roof visible in the distance, a view that had been blocked by the mansion for 100 years. "Where is the house?" she screamed again, grabbing the lapels of my jacket. I stood perfectly still. I didn't push her away. I didn't embrace her. I was a statue. "The house," I said calmly, "was structurally unsound, Elena. We had to remove it." "Remove it?" She let go of me and stepped back, her hands clutching her head. "Remove it? You erased it. It's gone. There's nothing left." "We cleared the site." I corrected her. "It's a standard procedure for a total remediation project." "Remediation? Are you insane? We bought this house 2 weeks ago. It was a historic landmark. It was my dream." Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her makeup. "I was away for 2 days. 2 days. How could you do this?" "I work efficiently," I said. She stared at me with horror. It was dawning on her that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a gas explosion or a fire. This was deliberate. "You did this," she whispered. "You tore it down on purpose." "I followed the recommendations of the report," I said. "The report Greg signed. Remember? He said the foundation was failing. He said it was a safety hazard. I couldn't risk your safety, Elena. I love you too much to let you live in a death trap. The mention of Greg's name hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes widened. She fumbled for her phone in her pocket. Her hand was shaking so badly, she dropped it in the mud. She scrambled to pick it up, wiping the screen frantically. I'm calling the police, she sobbed. I'm calling Greg. You're crazy. You've lost your mind. Go ahead, I said. Call him. He should be here. He's the project manager, after all. She dialed, putting the phone to her ear. Greg, answer. Pick up, pick up, pick up. She turned away from me, pacing back and forth on the straw-covered dirt. Greg, you have to come to Winter Hill. Now. It's gone. He destroyed it. David destroyed the house. It's just dirt, Greg. Please hurry. She hung up and looked at me. Her fear was turning into rage. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the viciousness of a cornered animal. You're going to jail, she hissed. You can't just destroy $1 million property. That's arson. That's vandalism. It's not arson if there's no fire, I pointed out gently. And it's not vandalism if you own the property. It's renovation. It's our house, she screamed. Mine and yours. Technically, I said, it belongs to Phoenix Project LLC. And as the director, I authorized the site clearance. You signed the waiver, Elena. You acknowledged that the company had the right to modify the assets. I didn't sign up for this. She gestured at the emptiness. I signed for a remodel. I signed for a kitchen. You signed a broad-spectrum liability release and a caretaker agreement, I said. You really should have read the fine print. She lunged at me, her nails aiming for my face. I caught her wrists. I didn't squeeze. I just held them, creating a barrier. Don't, I said. My voice dropped an octave. It was the voice I used when a contractor tried to cut corners on concrete quality. Cold. Absolute. Do not touch me, Elena. That would be assault. She crumpled. She sank to her knees in the mud, sobbing uncontrollably. It was a pathetic sight. The glamorous woman, the aspiring socialite, kneeling in the dirt of her shattered ambitions. I looked down at her. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the text messages. The wallet. The boring husband. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I poured more coffee. 10 minutes later, the black Mercedes roared up the driveway. Greg drove like a maniac, tires spinning as he drifted through the gate. He slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just inches from the perimeter fence. He jumped out. He wasn't wearing his suit today. He was in jeans and a polo shirt, looking disheveled. He ran toward us, his face a mask of confusion and anger. What the hell is going on? He shouted. He stopped next to Elena, pulling her up from the mud. Elena? Are you okay? He looked at the empty lot. He looked at the tracks of the excavators. He looked at me, sitting calmly with my coffee. David, what did you do? Greg demanded, stepping toward me. He was bigger than me, younger, fitter. He was used to intimidating people physically. Where is the house? It's in a landfill, I said. Most of it, anyway. We recycled the copper. You tore it down? Greg's voice cracked. Are you out of your mind? That house was worth $1.4 million. The land is worth $600,000, I said. The house was a liability. It had dry rot, termites, a shifting foundation. Remember, Greg? You signed the report. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the structural integrity assessment he had signed in the dark that night. Here it is, I said, holding it up. Immediate structural intervention required. Significant hazard to life and limb. Recommendation for partial or total demolition if stabilization is not cost-effective. Greg stared at the paper. His face went pale. He realized the trap instantly. He had signed that report to defraud the bank, to inflate the renovation loan. He had lied about the severity of the damage. If he now claimed the house was fine, he was admitting to bank fraud and professional negligence. If he stuck to the report, he had legally authorized the demolition. I didn't mean tear it down. Greg sputtered. I meant fix it. You knew that. We were going to get the loan and fix it. The loan. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, the bank denied the loan, Greg. Based on your report, they decided the asset was too risky to renovate. They demanded we mitigate the hazard. So, I used my own funds to remove the danger. I did exactly what a responsible owner should do. You, Greg took a step closer, his fists clenched. You played me. You set me up. I trusted your expertise, I said. You're the licensed contractor. You said it was dangerous. Who am I to argue with a professional? I'm going to kill you, he whispered. It was a figure of speech, a burst of impotent rage, but I saw the violence in his eyes. I wouldn't recommend that, I said, nodding toward the entrance. A police cruiser was turning slowly into the driveway. Blue lights flashed silently in the morning sun. I had texted my contact at the precinct as soon as Elena arrived, reporting a civil disturbance and trespassing at my commercial property. The cruiser crunched to a stop behind Greg's Mercedes. Two officers stepped out. One was older, Sergeant Miller, no relation to the demolition man, a stern-faced veteran I had met during a charity bill for the police station years ago. "Everything all right here, Mr. Mitchell?" the sergeant asked, walking onto the dirt. He kept his hand near his belt, his eyes scanning the scene. The crying woman, the aggressive man, the calm property owner. "Officer!" Elena screamed, running toward him. "Arrest him! He destroyed my house. He's crazy." "Ma'am, calm down," the sergeant said, holding up a hand. "Who destroyed what?" "Him." She pointed at me. "My husband. He tore down our house while I was away. Look at it. It's gone." The sergeant looked at the empty lot. He looked at me. "Mr. Mitchell, it's a commercial development site, Sergeant," I said, standing up and walking over. I handed him a heavy binder of documents. "I am the director of Phoenix Project LLC, the owner of record. We are performing site remediation. We have all the permits: demolition permit, environmental clearance, waste disposal manifest. Everything is in order." The sergeant opened the binder. He flipped through the permits. He saw the official stamps from the city. He saw the deed. "And these two?" the sergeant asked, gesturing to Elena and Greg. "My wife," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "And her friend, Mr. Stevens. They're upset about the design change. I understand their emotion, but they are currently trespassing on an active construction site without safety gear. And Mr. Stevens threatened me just before you arrived." Greg's jaw dropped. "I did not. I just said." "He said he was going to kill me," I interrupted calmly. "I'm sure it was just heat of the moment, but given the heavy machinery that was here yesterday, I'm concerned about safety." The sergeant looked at Greg. "Sir, is this your property?" "No, but are you an employee of Phoenix Project LLC?" "No, I'm the realtor who sold it to them, and I was the contractor for the reno." "So you have no legal standing to be on this land right now?" the sergeant asked. Greg stammered. Elena invited me." "Elena is a tenant," I said, "or rather, a caretaker, under the terms of her agreement. Tab C in the binder. Sergeant, she has no authority to invite guests onto the commercial premises without written approval from the director." "That's me." The sergeant flipped to tab C. He read the clause. He looked at Elena. "Ma'am, did you sign this?" I signed a bunch of papers," she wailed. "I didn't know he was going to do this." "Ignorance of the contract isn't a defense, ma'am," the sergeant said. He closed the binder and handed it back to me. "Mr. Mitchell, the paperwork looks solid. The house is gone. That's a civil matter between you and your wife. But regarding the site," he turned to Greg and Elena, "you two need to leave. The owner has requested you vacate the property. You can't kick me off my own land." Elena shrieked. "I live here. You live in the house," I said. "The house no longer exists. Therefore, your tenancy is void due to the destruction of the premises. It's a standard clause. You can't rent a pile of dirt, Elena." She stared at me. The logic was so cold, so airtight, she couldn't find a foothold. She looked at Greg for help. Greg was deflating. He realized the police were on my side. He realized the paperwork was ironclad. He realized he was standing in muddy jeans in front of a cop, having just threatened a prominent architect. "Come on, Elena," Greg muttered, grabbing her arm. "Let's go. We'll call a lawyer." "A lawyer?" I asked. "Good idea. You'll need one, Greg. By the way, I forwarded a copy of your structural report, the one declaring the house a hazard, to the state licensing board this morning, along with the photos of the hazard taken by the bank's auditor, who notes that the damage seemed exaggerated. They might have some questions about your competency or your ethics. Greg froze. The color drained from his face completely. You sent it to the board? And to the Association of Realtors, I added. I think there's a code of ethics regarding engaging in romantic relationships with clients while manipulating asset prices. I attached the text messages from Elena's phone as supporting evidence. The ones where you talk about me as a wallet. Greg let go of Elena's arm, as if she were radioactive. He looked at me with pure terror. He wasn't thinking about the house anymore. He was thinking about his license, his career, his livelihood. You recorded everything? He whispered. I archive everything. I said. I'm an architect. I keep records. Greg backed away. He looked at Elena, who was staring at him, waiting for him to fight for her. But Greg was a coward. He was a parasite who thrived on easy prey. When the prey fought back, he ran. I have to go, Greg stammered. I have to call my office. Greg, Elena asked, her voice trembling. Where are you going? You can't leave me here. He's crazy, Elena. He's got the cops. He's got the board. I can't deal with this. Greg turned and ran to his car. He jumped in, reversed aggressively, spraying gravel, and sped away down the road. He left her, just like that. Elena stood alone in the mud. The silence that followed was deafening. The sergeant looked at her with a mix of annoyance and pity. Ma'am, the sergeant said, you need to leave the property. Do you have a ride? She didn't answer. She was watching Greg's car disappear. The realization was crashing down on her. The house was gone. The lover was gone. The dream was gone. She turned to me slowly. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a hate so pure it was almost beautiful. You monster, she whispered. You planned this. You let me buy it just to destroy it. I gave you what you wanted, I said softly. You wanted the house. You wanted Greg. Now you have exactly what you built with him. Nothing. I'm going to divorce you, she spat. I'm going to take everything. Every penny. We can discuss that, I said. But not here. This is a construction site. It's not safe for civilians. I nodded to the sergeant. Ma'am, let's go, the officer said, taking her elbow gently. I can call you a cab. I don't have any money, she cried. He blocked my cards. I'll pay for the cab, I said. I pulled a $20 bill from my pocket, the same amount she used to tip valets, and held it out. Send her to her mother's house. She slapped the money out of my hand. It fluttered down into the mud. I don't want your money, she screamed. She turned and walked toward the road, stumbling in the ruts, her expensive coat trailing in the dirt. She walked past the mailbox. She walked out of the gate. She started walking down the public road, aimless, broken. The sergeant sighed. I'll have the patrol car follow her, make sure she gets somewhere safe. Thank you, Sergeant, I said. I appreciate your professionalism. Mr. Mitchell, the sergeant said, pausing by his car door. I've seen a lot of disputes. Domestic calls are the worst. But this is... I've never seen anything like this. You really tore down a mansion just to make a point? I looked at the empty field. I looked at the grass sprouting through the straw. I didn't tear it down to make a point, Sergeant, I said. I tore it down because the foundation was rotten. If you build on a lie, the structure will eventually collapse. I just controlled the demolition. The sergeant shook his head, got into his car, and drove slowly after Elena. I was alone again. I sat back down in my chair. The coffee was getting cold. I looked at the empty space where the living room used to be. I tried to conjure the image of the house, the peeling paint, the dark windows. But I couldn't. The image was fading, replaced by the reality of the open sky. It was done. The physical structure of their betrayal had been erased. The trap had been sprung. Greg was running to save a career that was already dead. Elena was walking down a road with no home to go to. But the work wasn't finished. Demolition is only the first phase. Now came the cleanup, the legal sorting of debris, the final accounting. I picked up my phone. I had one more call to make. Marcus, I said when my lawyer answered. David, is it done? It's done, I said. The asset is liquidated. The police have removed the trespassers. Elena has declared her intent to divorce. Okay, Marcus said. I'll file the petition first thing tomorrow morning. We'll cite the infidelity clause in the prenup. With the evidence you have, it should be straightforward. And Marcus? Yes. Prepare the eviction notice for the downtown apartment, I said. The one she thinks we still live in. Technically, the lease is in my name, and I'm terminating it. I don't want her going back there. David, Marcus warned, that's leaving her homeless. She has a mother, I said, and she has a boyfriend. Let's see how strong their relationship is when there's no mansion and no money. Understood, Marcus said. I'll have the courier deliver the papers. I hung up. I poured the last of the coffee into the mud. A libation for the ghosts. I folded my chair. I picked up my thermos. I walked to my car, my shoes crunching on the gravel. I didn't look back. There was nothing to see, and that was the beauty of it. I drove away from Winter Hill, leaving the gate wide open. There was nothing left to steal. As I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city and my concrete sanctuary at the spire, I felt a lightness in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of a load being lifted. The structural stress was gone. I turned on the radio. A classic rock station was playing. The Rolling Stones. Paint it black. I smiled. A small, dry smile. I had painted it black. I had painted it all black. And now, I was ready to watch the paint dry. The final act was approaching. The courtroom. The paperwork. The official end. But the real end had happened today, in the mud, when she realized that her greed had bought her nothing but a plot of empty earth. I checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was clear. I accelerated. The city skyline rose ahead of me, sharp and clean and honest. My world, a world of steel and glass, where everything was transparent and nothing could hide in the walls. The conference room at Thorne & Associates was designed to intimidate. It was situated on the 45th floor, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a vertigo-inducing view of the Puget Sound. The table was a slab of polished black granite, cold to the touch and long enough to land a small aircraft on. The air was filtered, scented faintly with lemon and expensive leather. It was a sterile environment, a vacuum where emotions were sucked out and replaced by statutes and clauses. I sat at the head of the table, facing the door. Marcus sat to my right, organizing a stack of files with the meticulous care of a surgeon preparing his instruments. He didn't look up when I checked my watch. It was 9:15 a.m. They were 15 minutes late. In the world of business, lateness is a power play. It is a way of saying, my time is more valuable than yours. But today, I knew it wasn't tactic. It was chaos. Elena was not late because she was strategizing. She was late because her life had been dismantled. She was likely struggling to find a parking spot for a borrowed car or arguing with a lawyer who hadn't been paid a retainer yet. I took a sip of water. My hands were steady. The tremor I used to feel when confronting conflict, that old human reflex of adrenaline, was gone. It had been replaced by a flat, gray calm. I felt like the building we were sitting in, steel, concrete, immovable. The heavy oak doors finally opened. Elena walked in first. The change in her was startling. It had only been a week since the incident at Winter Hill, but the erosion was visible. The gloss was gone. Her hair, usually a perfect cascade of salon-styled waves, was pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She wasn't wearing the cream cashmere coat she had worn on the day of the demolition. She was wearing a simple navy blazer that looked a size too big, likely pulled from the back of a closet she hadn't touched in years. Her eyes were red-rimmed, devoid of makeup, and they darted around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped bird. Behind her walked her attorney. I recognized him, Simon Weathers. He was a bulldog lawyer, known for high-conflict divorces and theatrical courtroom outbursts. He wore a pinstripe suit and carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it held 1,000 grudges. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to burn the earth. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't shake Marcus's hand. He pulled out a chair for Elena, sat down, and slammed his briefcase onto the granite table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Let's cut the pleasantries, Weathers barked, his voice gravelly. My client is a victim of financial abuse, malicious destruction of property, and emotional distress. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to demand restitution. Marcus adjusted his glasses. He looked at Weathers with a bored expression. Good morning to you too, Simon. I see you haven't lost your flair for the dramatic. Elena didn't speak. She stared at me across the table. Her gaze was a mixture of hatred and confusion. She was still trying to reconcile the man she thought she could manipulate with the man sitting across from her. She was looking for the weakness, the soft underbelly she had exploited for 5 years. She found only granite. "We are filing for immediate spousal support," Weathers continued, opening a folder. "We want access to all marital accounts unfrozen immediately. We want the full value of the Winter Hill property as it stood prior to the illegal demolition, appraised at $1.4 million. And we want 50% of Mr. Mitchell's architectural firm, as its value increased significantly during the marriage." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "And if we don't get it, we go to trial. And I will put your client on the stand and paint him as an unhinged lunatic who bulldozes houses to spite his wife. The press will eat it up. The mad architect of Seattle. How will that look for business, David?" It was a good speech. A standard shakedown. Threaten the reputation, demand the cash. I looked at Weathers, then I looked at Elena. "Are you done?" I asked softly. Weathers narrowed his eyes. "I'm just getting started." "Actually," Marcus interrupted, his voice smooth and dangerous, "you're finished. You just don't know it yet." Marcus slid a single document across the polished table. It stopped perfectly in front of Weathers. "What is this?" Weathers sneered, picking it up. "That," Marcus said, "is the financial disclosure for the Phoenix Project LLC, the entity that owns the land formerly known as Winter Hill." Weathers scanned the page. His frown deepened. "As you can see," Marcus explained, "the entity is currently underwater. The purchase of the property was leveraged against a commercial loan from Mr. Mitchell's firm. The asset, the house, was deemed a total loss due to structural failure, certified by a licensed contractor. The demolition costs were substantial. The company has zero liquidity. In fact, it has a negative equity of nearly $200,000. That's accounting tricks," Weathers spat. "He destroyed the asset on purpose. He mitigated a safety hazard," Marcus corrected. "We have the police report from the day of the incident. We have the signed safety waiver from your client acknowledging the dangerous condition of the property. And most importantly, we have the report signed by the project manager, Mr. Greg Stevens, declaring the structure imminent danger to life." At the mention of Greg's name, Elena flinched. She looked down at her hands. "Speaking of Mr. Stevens," I said, breaking my silence. "How is he, Elena? I haven't heard from him since he ran away from the police." Elena looked up. Her eyes were wet. "You ruined him," she whispered. "He lost his license. The board suspended him pending an investigation. He won't answer my calls. He lost his license because he committed fraud," I said emotionlessly. "He signed a report stating a house was falling down when it wasn't, just to inflate a loan. Or he signed a truthful report, in which case I was right to tear it down. Which is it, Elena? Was he a fraudster? Or was the house a dump? You can't have it both ways." Weathers looked at Elena. "Who is Greg Stevens?" "The contractor," Elena mumbled. "And the co-conspirator," I added. "And the lover." Weathers froze. He looked from me to his client. "Loa." Marcus slid a second folder across the table. This one was thicker. It was the evidence file. "Mr. Weathers," Marcus said, "before you threaten to take half of my client's firm, I suggest you review the prenuptial agreement signed 5 years ago. Specifically, Article 4, Section C, the infidelity clause." Weathers opened the folder. The first page was the transcript of the text messages from the iCloud sync. The wallet, the playground, the photos of the car ride, the dates, the times. The room went silent. The only sound was the turning of pages. "Jesus," Weathers muttered under his breath. He was a bulldog, but he was also a professional. He knew a dead end when he saw one. He looked at the timestamps. He looked at the content. It wasn't just cheating, it was a conspiracy to defraud. "Your client," Marcus continued, "was engaged in an extramarital affair with the realtor who sold them the property. These messages prove a premeditated intent to divorce Mr. Mitchell after the renovation was funded by his money. They conspired to inflate costs. They conspired to manipulate the marital assets. Marcus leaned forward. This isn't just grounds for denying alimony, Simon. This is grounds for a civil suit for damages. Attempted fraud. Conspiracy. If we go to trial, David won't be the one looking like a lunatic. Elena will be the one looking like a criminal. And Mr. Stevens? He'll be lucky if he doesn't end up in jail. Weathers closed the folder. He didn't slam it this time. He closed it gently, as if it contained a bomb. He turned to Elena. His face was red. You didn't tell me about the realtor. I didn't think he knew. Elena stammered. He never said anything. He acted normal. He acted like a man who was gathering evidence. Weathers snapped at her. He rubbed his temples. He knew the case was dead. The leverage was gone. So, Weathers said, turning back to us, his tone significantly humbled. What is the offer? There is no offer, I said. Elena gasped. David, please. I have nothing. You blocked the cards. I'm staying in my mother's guest room. I don't even have a car. The lease was in your name. You have what you brought into the marriage, I said. Your clothes. Your jewelry. The personal items I had moved to your mother's house yesterday. But the house. She pleaded. The land. It's still worth something. The land belongs to the LLC, I reminded her. And here is the reality of the situation, Elena. Since we are still legally married, and since you signed the loan documents as a guarantor for the renovation that never happened, you are technically liable for half the debt of the Phoenix project. Her eyes widened in horror. Debt. The cost of the purchase. The cost of the demolition. The cost of the environmental cleanup. The LLC is in the red. If we split the assets today, I would have to hand you a bill for roughly $100,000. She slumped in her chair. She looked small. The arrogance was completely evaporated. She was just a person who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. However, I said, leaning back, I'm not a cruel man. I just want a clean slate. I signaled to Marcus. He pulled out the final document, the settlement agreement. If you sign this today, I said, I will absorb the debt of the LLC. I will assume full liability for the Phoenix project. You walk away with zero debt, but you also walk away with zero assets. No alimony, no claim on the firm, no claim on the land. A clean break. We file for an uncontested divorce, effective immediately. Weathers read the document quickly. He looked at Elena. Take it, he whispered. Take it and run. If he sues you for the fraud with the realtor, you'll be bankrupt for a decade. Elena looked at the paper. Her hands were shaking. She picked up the pen. She looked at me one last time. Why didn't you just yell at me? She asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't you just fight me like a normal person? Why did you have to build this whole trap? Because you didn't just break my heart, Elena, I said. You tried to break my life. You treated me like a resource, like a foundation you could build on and then discard. I just showed you what happens when a foundation decides to move. She looked down. She signed the paper. A tear fell onto the signature line, blotting the ink slightly, but the name was legible. Elena Mitchell. It's done, Marcus said, pulling the papers away before she could change her mind. Weathers stood up. He packed his briefcase. He looked tired. Mr. Mitchell. Marcus. He nodded to us, a professional acknowledgement of a total defeat. Come on, Elena, he said. Elena stood up. She didn't look at me again. She walked to the door, her shoulders hunched. She looked like a stranger. The woman I had married, the woman I'd built a life with, had ceased to exist the moment I saw those text messages. This person was just a ghost fading into the hallway. The door closed. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Silence returned to the room. The air filtration system hummed. The view of the city remained unchanged. Well, Marcus said, exhaling a long breath. That went better than expected. I thought Weathers would fight harder on the LLC structure. He knew he couldn't, I said. The fraud evidence was the nail in the coffin. He couldn't risk his own reputation defending a conspiracy. You're a free man, David, Marcus said. He smiled. And you're broke. On paper, at least. That LLC is a disaster. It's a tax write-off, I said, standing up. It's a loss I'm happy to take. I walked to the window. I looked down at the city grid. I could see the traffic moving in arterial veins, the construction cranes pivoting in the distance. It was all a system. Inputs and outputs. Stress and support. I had dismantled the rogue element in my system. Now, equilibrium was restored. What will you do with the land? Marcus asked, packing up the files. Winter Hill? It's just a mud pit now. I have a plan, I said. 6 months later, the seasons had turned. The gray rain of Seattle had given way to the crisp, golden light of early autumn. The air smelled of wood smoke and dried leaves. I stood on the balcony of my apartment at the Spire. I had grown to love this place. It was minimal, efficient, and honest. There was no clutter. Every object in the room had a purpose. I had sold the old furniture, the things that reminded me of the marital home. I had bought new pieces, sharp angles, mid-century modern, leather and chrome. My phone rang. I checked the caller ID. Jansen Development Group. I swiped to answer. David Mitchell. David, it's Bob Jansen. How are you? I'm well, Bob. Busy. We just broke ground on the library project. Good to hear, good to hear. Listen, I'm calling about that property you own out in the suburbs. The one on the hill. 2401. What about it? I asked, leaning against the railing. Well, my scouts have been looking at it. It's a prime lot. Great views, solid bedrock underneath, once you get past the topsoil. But the thing is, usually those old lots are a nightmare because of the historic preservation rules. You can't tear down the old Victorians without a 5-year battle with the city council. I smiled. I took a sip of my espresso. But this lot, Bob continued, sounding excited, it's clean. My guy went out there. It's literally shovel-ready. Graded, seated, empty. No demolition permits needed. No preservation fights. It's a developer's dream. We could put 3 luxury modern units up there. High-end eco-homes. Glass and steel. 3 units, I repeated. That sounds like a profitable venture. Exactly. We want it, David. And because we don't have to factor in demo costs or legal battles, we can offer a premium. I'm prepared to offer you $2.2 million for the land. As is. $2.2 million. I had bought the house for $4 million. The demolition had cost me $40,000. The legal fees were another $20,000. I did the math in my head. A profit of over $700,000. And because the asset had been held by the LLC for the requisite period, and the sale would be a commercial transaction, the capital gains tax would be manageable. 2.2 is a fair start, Bob, I said calmly. But you know the zoning there is unique. You won't find another clear lot in that zip code. Let's say 2.4, and I hand you the geotechnical surveys I've already done. Bob laughed. You're a shark, Mitchell. Always have been. All right, 235. And we close in 30 days. Deal, I said. Send the papers to Marcus. I hung up. I looked out at the city. $2.35 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. Elena had wanted the house for the status, for the money, for the investment. She and Greg had plotted to steal half of the equity. But in their greed, they had focused on the structure, the rotting, worthless structure. They hadn't understood that the real value was in the land itself and the potential for something new. By destroying the house, I hadn't just saved myself. I had increased the value of the asset. I had cleared the way for the future. I walked back inside. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the lonely silence of the old house. It was a peaceful silence. I sat down at my drafting table. I had a new commission. A client wanted a home on the coast, a place that could withstand the storms, the salt, the erosion. I picked up my pencil. I drew a line. Straight, strong, unwavering. I thought about Greg for a moment. I had heard rumors. He was working as a bartender in a dive bar near the port. His real estate license had been revoked permanently. He was facing lawsuits from 2 other former clients who had discovered similar inaccuracies in his paperwork after my case went public. He was finished. And Elena? I saw her once from a distance. She was walking out of a discount grocery store. She looked older. She looked tired. She was living a real life now, a life without facades. Maybe it would be good for her. Maybe, eventually, she would learn to build something of her own. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I was the architect. My job was to design structures that held up. I looked at the drawing in front of me. I sketched the foundation. Deep piles driven into the bedrock. Concrete and rebar. The foundation, I whispered to myself. It always starts with the foundation. If the foundation is a lie, the house will fall. I had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but I had survived the collapse. I had crawled out of the rubble, brushed off the dust, and built a fortress. I finished the sketch. It was perfect. I turned off the light in the studio. I walked into the living room and put a record on the turntable. Miles Davis again, blue and green. The trumpet floated through the air, melancholic but beautiful. I sat on a leather sofa and closed my eyes. The war was over. The site was cleared. The blueprints were drawn. I was ready to build.